Our first speaker today is Jody Bonacore, Director of Marketing Communications for OnPath. Jody, please go ahead.
Thanks, Rick. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Test Automation for Tomorrow, IT Testing Complexity Simplified. I'd like to first introduce today's featured speaker, Roger Hine. Roger is a service delivery consultant and the principal of LabPath Automation Consulting. He specializes in IT, IP, and data center lab efficiency and test automation. Through his consultative efforts, Roger enables his clients to reach higher equipment utilization and faster test cycle times while achieving targeted cost savings and decreased ROI times. Roger has over 20 years of experience in the datacom and telecom industries with such companies as Ericsson, ACC, and NET. Our panelists today include Brian McCann, who is CEO of OnPath Technologies, a leader in scalable connectivity and monitoring solutions for high-performance networks. Brian is responsible for the vision, growth strategy, and total leadership of the company. Lior Koryat is CEO of Quala Systems, a leading provider of enterprise software solutions for lab management, device provisioning, and test automation that drive innovation, efficiency, and ROI for their customers. Lior is responsible for providing strategic leadership and overseeing the company's long-range goals, strategies, and policies. And our third panelist, Jim Smith, is Vice President of Marketing for Ixia. Ixia provides the industry's most comprehensive converged IP services testing solution from the wireless edge to the internet core. Jim is responsible for leading the company's strategic marketing, including the creation and implementation of Ixia's global marketing strategy. During today's webinar, Roger will spend about 20 minutes discussing the typical challenges and benefits associated with test automation. He'll provide some specific use cases and economic examples, as well as steps to implementing a successful test automation environment. We'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll take some questions for Roger and the panel from the live audience. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Roger Hine from LabPath Automation Consulting. Roger, you now have the floor.
All right. Thanks, Jody. I'm very excited to participate in today's webinar. So without further ado, let's get started. The test automation solution slide here highlights many of the applications in a typical lab or test environment, such as system test, function test, regression test, etc. Test automation applications are increasingly more and more important to the equipment manufacturer and service providers. This webinar will cover how to reduce time to testing, improve the utilization of test lab resources, as well as how to reduce the cost and increase the value for testing. So whether your application is function test or simply sharing test tools in general, we'll be covering the benefits in more detail. Deploying a test automation solution sounds wonderful. However, it poses a significant set of challenges for most organizations. First, multiple test and verification routines can be especially error-prone when performed manually. Cable management is always difficult to manage in an environment where many changes move into add-ons. Also, equipment utilization is often below 40% when there is limited remote access and sharing. And most lab managers run blind to true utilization stats, yet the budget limits are always being repeated. Increasing utilization of existing lab equipment is only achieved when the tools are in place to monitor and the controls are enforced to drive targets. Another notable challenge is how the time to set up and tear down often creates a lot of waiting for test engineers, while the lab support teams service multiple change orders. Productivity of lab engineering as well as the increased utilization of lab equipment can be dramatically improved by scheduling activities in advance and automatically reconfiguring the test cases without sending people out to the labs itself. These are all formidable and non-trivial challenges, but they can be solved with the right test automation solutions. As you can see on this slide, there are two different graphic examples of device utilization measurements. The illustration on top shows the challenges of the need to increase visibility and how existing and available equipment is being allocated. When you look at the graph, three things stand out. First, the generator pool is never at 100%. Second, the devices under test are way underutilized. And third, the overall equipment utilization varies dramatically. If we looked at the bullets, the allocation of the low utilized equipment becomes more difficult to share across test beds, so you have lower overall usage. Labs are running individually or out of control as a result of limited test coordination. And generally, as the complexity of your test environment increases, visibility of your components decreases, which in turn makes it harder to justify new or additional equipment purchases. Lior, do you have any comments you'd like to add here?
Thank you very much, Roger. Utilization is indeed a key challenge for our customers, and from our experience, there are several key challenges around that, starting from even knowing what is the exact level of device and lab asset utilization that you have in the lab, identifying and resolving bottlenecks, and optimizing the level of usage of any port, device, server, analyzer, test equipment that you have. Recent customer reports that we received showed existing utilization that stands at around 15 to 25%. And when you consider a multi-million-dollar lab, every single percentage here literally costs a lot of money. And a good example of how painful this could be is that if, for example, a setup is real tedious for a certain configuration that you need to test, you actually reserve it to way longer than you actually need it, just because of that tedious setup time, and you end up utilizing the equipment about 10 or 5% from really the time that is being reserved, and this imposes a lot of difficulties and maybe wrong considerations on how to run the lab.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Lior. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide, and that is depicting remote access as both a challenge and a benefit. From a global perspective, many companies have many different test labs in many different locations, some of which are doing the same types of testing or testing of different issues across the same types of equipment. Having each location operate independently provides high flexibility to each site, but actually reduces coordination and speed on the bigger projects, and requires a lot more capital for each lab to have duplicate devices for test and test equipment, as well as space, power, and the people to manage them. In this slide, we're showing a company that has a large global lab footprint and is trying to leverage coordination across the sites. RTP, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, represents a large center where most of the physical equipment and test resources are located. So by using test automation software, Telnet or SSH from remote sites, it's possible for the end users to access remote resources available or underutilized equipment at that central site. However, in order to do this, the remote users must be able to see what's available, reserve the systems for when they need it, and have a common procedure and test environment across the global organization to leverage the benefit. I'm sure many lab managers have experienced the test coordination challenge or test silos across a single campus. But the issue gets even harder to coordinate across a global team without the right automation and management tools. Jim, what have you seen in this area?
Sure. So a few comments on that. I would say I agree with what you're saying here. And with separate processes or multiple remote labs, I would have to say that it's a challenge mostly with distributed organizations. And you need that internal support, you need some sponsorship, and you need to find objectives to overcome some of these challenges. Now, I know that Ixia spends time educating our customers around best practices and deploying standards to help address how to leverage remote access and testing to maintain your release cycles and overall quality. This requires commitment, to be very honest, and I will say the ROI is there. There's really high ROI when leveraging remote access and making sure you execute on it well.
Oh, perfect. Thanks for that, Jim. All right, let's move on. So we talked about some of the challenges, so let's talk about some of the benefits now. So what are the key benefits of test automation? In this slide, we're going to focus on what the three key benefits of test automation are, which boil down to faster test cycles, increased utilization, and improving value. And I'd like to ask Brian to elaborate here.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. So I think it's important for the audience to know we've gone from the challenges. Now we're talking about how do you implement some of the benefits with a test automation solution. In the examples of faster test cycles, as the next areas will cover, faster test cycles means getting more done in the same amount of time or bringing products to market faster to be able to have teams work together. Increased utilization is very much around taking the existing resources that are out there to what Leo and Roger commented on earlier, and getting that utilization not only measured, but getting it up and getting everybody more efficient throughout the organization, which brings to the improving value, where we'll get to some of the business cases that we cover, both from a pure CapEx savings standpoint, as well as also looking at the benefits of improving that utilization and turning it into faster cycle times.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian. So let's talk about reducing the time to completion. On the right-hand side, you can see many bullets that address this. But what we're really trying to talk to about is, when you're talking about time to completion, a clear benefit is being able to go from weeks and days to complete a test to hours and minutes. When test automation is deployed, testing is more structured and transparent, and the planning and executing tests becomes a lot easier. One engineer can run multiple tests in parallel, opposed to many engineers running tests manually. You could also, device planning and allocation, scheduling, and reservation is possible, and you could drag and drop topology creations. You could also create, maintain, and save topologies in a central server, enabling sharing by multiple teams. This all gives you better test consistency from iteration to iteration. We'd also like to talk to you about increased global utilization. Now, this slide's a little bit busy, but as you can see, again, we'll use RTP as a central site. In this case, RTP functions as a central site due to its lower OpEx costs, so you can concentrate on lower cost areas. San Jose, California, and Bangalore, India test engineers can share RTP's resources during, quote, off hours and getting closer to that 24/7 access. RTP can also function as the main competence SME and provide global focus for improvements and ongoing development and support. So here we get to leverage global competencies and identify best practices and enable knowledge sharing. Some of the added benefits, of course, are improved efficiency across your test organization. You could also have a common pool of equipment available. So the next slide we want to demonstrate is, what is the functional test value of, we show you two different ways or examples of test lab value. When it comes to saving money for a larger group, such as functional testing, and the next one is smaller group testing, such as interoperability, I'd like to go over an example that I ran, the results comparing manual testing versus automated testing. Keep in mind that the numbers are very conservative and your mileage will vary. So let's look at the manual side on the left-hand column. In the manual case, we had an annual cap investment of $3.5 million for switches, routers, test equipment used in the function test lab. The technician time was the total cost for 3 engineers that were dedicated to managing the lab infrastructure and test setups, excluding any of the engineering personnel that use the equipment for their function tests. And the facility cost was the physical space plus the power and cooling required to run the lab. As you can see, the total cost was $4.8 million with the cash portion of the budget for this lab. On the right-hand side, after automation and staying in the same facility, we were able to create significant savings as well as improve productivity across the function test team. The capital investment was able to be significantly reduced because we were able to improve sharing across the platforms and move between test cases more quickly. While we did invest in automation switches, software, and additional devices, you can see that the overall lab capital budget was able to be reduced by $900,000, or almost 30%. The technician cost improved by sharing over approved 40 hours per week, or one technician, with the automation reconfiguration, improved coordination, and reduced wasting time. These numbers exclude the additional engineering productivity savings, which were proven to be another 2 hours per week, or over $300,000 per year for the team as additional savings. And finally, the facility costs were simply the reduction of rack space and equipment costs allowed by the improved sharing. The facility cost also includes any of the extra automation equipment required for the program. So pulling all this together, we found a savings of $1.2 million, or about 25% of the manual cost scenario. In addition, we were able to increase our test coverage by well over 20% per week, which further helped to reduce our time to market and new product introduction. Another example of bringing more value to testing is for interoperability labs. This applies to both interoperability across platforms or common vendors, or more typically, interoperability across multiple vendors, products, and platforms. In either case, the number of devices and connections in an operability lab, test lab, is generally much smaller, but the number of test cases and combination of those configurations would be higher. This is an example I worked on directly with OnPath Technologies, so I'll let Brian talk through the data on the chart.
Thanks, Roger. So there's a lot of information here, but to highlight Roger's point, there is a significant difference between an interoperability test lab and a functional test lab. Here, what you can see in the manual versus the automated cases, the number of test cases per month is obviously the same. The number of test cases or the number of connections per test case is the same, and the test runtime at 55 minutes is the same. The difference starts to kick in when you look at the difference between the connections between the planning and setup time between a manual and an automated environment. And the planning for a manual connection includes a lot of the connection, what needs to be made, a lot of the layout, making sure that the logistics for when you make the connections, they're managed correctly. 1 minute versus effectively 10 seconds on the automated side. And then the setup time to actually go make the connections, verify those connections, and get them completed is on average about 3 minutes in a manual configuration versus about 2 seconds in an automated configuration where everything happens automatically. So, that's clearly a big difference here. What you can see is when you put those pieces together, although the test runtime itself is only 55 minutes, the entire elapsed time per test in a manual environment is 12 hours versus in an automated environment is 2 hours. And that 2 hours is including the planning time for those tests that are actually planned in advance and need to be repeated in repeat cases. All of the planning time done up here goes to zero, and it's purely connection times between the two platforms. Now, by looking at the actual capital under investment, in the case of the manual test, it's $600,000 versus in the automated case, there's an extra $200,000, which is roughly what's needed for the automated switching, the software, and the extra test equipment that may go with that automated environment. But you can see by allocating the actual capital to the time used, we can actually reduce the cost per test by $1,000 per test, which adds up to over $50,000 on a monthly expense, or over $550,000 actually at an annualized level. So the assumption here, of course, is that the lab and this capital can be used for other purposes and not repurposed for other applications. But this is where the sharing comes in. If there are others that can use that lab, then clearly this cost of capital can be depreciated amongst other applications. So the benefits here for a test lab example like this is twofold. One is the pure economics, as we've outlined here in the dollars, $1,000 per test all the way up to $550,000 of better use of capital if you can share the lab with other groups or share that lab cost. But the more significant piece is also the testing time, being able to reduce the actual testing time by sixfold. So whether it's the ROI payback of 4 months or the testing time improvement of over sixfold, you get your products to market faster and at a lower cost. Back to you, Roger.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. So this is a great example, and many lab managers know that when customer requirement or product release is near a deadline, the time savings is often the most important issue for them to improve. Very good. So we've covered some challenges, we covered benefits. So how do you start to implement test automation? This last section of the webinar covers how to build a test automation program for your company or your lab. My recommendations are the following steps. Step one is to start small, but keep in mind with test automation software, time to value is very short. Next is to expand your use case and business value. And the third step is to bring it into your engineering lab culture. So let's start with the first step. One of the best ways to implement test automation is to start small and build a test case. Business case, I should say. So you'll need to get agreed on KPIs. And the KPIs are the key performance indicators. In this slide, the KPIs are going to be time, utilization metrics, and business. What that really means is time, cost, and utilization. Essentially, you'll need to define the roadmap, which defines the entrance and exit criteria leading to your business case. It's also very important to find an area for clear opportunities. I like to refer to as low-hanging fruit. So don't select your most difficult, challenging group first. Start with a smaller engineering group that can be managed easily. Good examples of places to start small are where there are less than 100 ports that need to move with high frequency or have a lot of problems with when moved, such as new 40-gig interface or 100-gig interfaces, or where groups are trying to share equipment but are complaining about extensive wait time without enough equipment to access. In this slide, we'd like to talk about how do you expand it? How do you expand your test automation? The first way to expand your test automation is scale the lab configs and test cases, which allows you better control to prioritize key test functions and plan test executions. Using test automation gives you the ability to architect infrastructure and combine test equipment resources across teams and labs to complete end-to-end no testing. You can also create a system for reusable scripts, test cases, refactoring with minimum modifications. Next is to build standardized procedures. So here we'd like to perform a gap analysis, which in turn helps to develop a generic deployment process for use with other groups and sites. And of course, you should always be reviewing your processes, guidelines, and ways of working. And lastly is to broaden your business case. So you'll need to identify new requirements and specific information and establish business objectives, including proofs of concept. You need to look at how much money needs to be invested, how much engineers need to test, how much time it takes to execute those tests manually versus automated, and compare many manual testing cases you'll need to execute and what the new feature sets will need to be released. I always like to begin with the end in mind. Try to visualize what the end result will look and feel like for the end user and the support teams. And lastly is, how do you get the test automation into the lab culture? The last step is really drives huge benefit of test automation is to get it into that lab culture. And by changing lab culture, we know it's always challenging at best. But here are some direct ways to get test automation into that lab culture. First, start with an executive initiative. What I mean is get a directive, and the directive must be top-driven. The directive should define on how both test environment services and equipment shall be handled within the organization, and who is responsible for what. Next, you'll need to have budgetary visibility and coordination. And by using the data collection and analysis capacity, as well as the real-time utilization stats, you can easily show and report financial information that can be used to make better CapEx decisions within your team, group, or organization. Also, having a champion within the test group and upper management is also key. We can't forget about engineering satisfaction. So focusing on engineering satisfaction comes from being able to constantly and consistently prove and provide test tools and devices under test access so that the test engineers feel confident that he or she will have the needed equipment available anytime they need it. You could also increase engineering satisfaction by reviewing processes including SLA, service level agreements, between the end user and the lab service team, and that'll help to set clear expectations while showing measured results. All right. Well, we've covered a lot in the last 20 minutes, so here's a quick recap for you. First, we covered the key challenges in network testing. Traditional labs are typically slow and costly to operate and maintain, and they offer very limited access and create silos across test groups, both in local campus or across global organizations. Leveraging the overall lab assets is desired, but the visibility, utilization, and coordination is very difficult. But you can see limited local access, CapEx, capital intensive, higher operating expenses. If you go over to automated, then we cover the benefits of the automated lab environment. We discussed how automation improves the time to plan and set up tests, reduce errors, and can dramatically improve utilization of existing resources. We reviewed 2 value examples that saved significant capital and provided significant improvement to cycle times. Finally, we discussed how to build test automation program by starting small, expanding the business case, then driving the lab automation culture. The steps obviously take time, but they're critical in building proof points and mind share around engineering organizations that will most benefit from the automation. Upgrading to an automated test environment should create faster test cycle times, improved utilization of lab resources, and increased value across the organization. Now, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists. So why don't you guys give us a quick summary and tell us where your company is in the test automation market. Starting with Brian McCann from OnPath Technologies.
Thank you, Roger, and great job covering everything there. So OnPath Technologies, we're a leader in the scalable connectivity and monitoring access solution products for high-performance networks. Our products include a UCS 2900 and 3900 switch, which is the most scalable and flexible layer 1 through 4 platform on the planet. Our products support everything from copper to optical fiber, multimode and single-mode technologies, speeds that range from low speed, 1 megabit, all the way up to 100 gigabit applications, and port sizes ranging from small entry-level 16-port platforms all the way up to 4,000-port non-blocking switches. And our Horizon software management both manages the platforms themselves individually or in a remote network, but we also work with our partners such as Qualys Systems Test Shell and the Ixia Test Conductor to be able to have handoffs so we can have a total automation solution. So with that, Leo, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Qualys System is a pure enterprise software provider for lab management, device provisioning, and test automation. We actually serve customers throughout the value chain of telecommunication, from chipset manufacturers, network equipment manufacturers, and carriers, but also storage providers, data centers, and service providers. We offer, as Brian mentioned, a complete and modular framework that we call Test Shell that covers everything from inventory management, device scheduling and reservation, topology management and enforcement, with integration with the OnPath solutions, device integration and provisioning, and a comprehensive test and business intelligence solution. One of our uniqueness basically is that we're able to drive all of the equipment that you have in the lab, from the core network devices, devices under test, servers, switches, management applications, and test equipment. While doing so, we make sure that we maintain a strong and open relationship with our valued partners like Ixia and OnPath, basically to provide a better support and an immediate out-of-the-box support for releases and latest releases of those partners for the benefit of our customers. So we basically maintain a no wrong door policy for our customers, and if we can, by that, introduce a better customer-first culture, and that's what we're all about. I'll pass it now to Jim from Ixia. Jim?
Sure, thank you. So I guess if you think about how we fit into the test automation market, the best way to say it is, there's converging IP network technologies, and they're creating pressure on overall quality assurance teams and other teams to validate system functionality, conformance, interoperability, for example. Now, these devices and systems and services place very unique requirements on the network's priority of data to high-performance applications. And if you think about it, the equipment manufacturers, such as the NEMs, need to bring products to market to meet demands of their customers. Service providers are racing to deploy new service offerings based on new devices and protocols, while enterprise IT departments, they're seeing their networks morph into, I would say, a higher capacity, more cost-effective, and more, I would say, environmental-friendly systems. Now, all these companies require, or I would say segments require, comprehensive testing. to ensure correct and proper design, lower cost delivery, higher performance network, and better quality of experience for the customers. So test case quantity, complexity is growing, and that trend's continuing to go and move. And Ixia's automation solutions with our partners such as Poly Systems, OnPath, that's where this great ecosystem comes together to address these key market needs, and that is how we're addressing this automation market today.
Okay, great. Thanks to Roger, and also thanks to our panelists. We'll now open up the floor to our attendees for our Q&A session. We have a few questions that have come in so far. So let's start with this one. How does lab management and tool sharing affect actual testing performance?
Leo, you want to take that?
I guess, yeah, I can answer this one. I would start by saying that first, it increases the lab performance by reducing the setup time and allowing remote access to users all around the world from different labs or from within the same lab but different groups. We allow to have more projects or to drive more projects out of a single lab with less conflicts between those teams. And then optimizing testing performance, which basically reducing the time to automate, as we call it, it enables the engineers to increase testing coverage and to spend more time into testing. And the third would be maintaining team independence, which is very important. It's turning this entire lab environment to kind of a service-based one, where everyone can log in and request their reservation or topology that they need and efficiently set this up without having to wait for someone to do this for them. Kind of increases the efficiency of the overall lab.
Yeah, and Jody, this is Jim Smith with Ixia. I would absolutely agree, and my comments on there is that when it's done right, our customers are seeing more testing, and what does that mean? That means delivering higher quality products, gaining more productivity. So it's about leveraging the equipment they already have, maximizing the resourcing, and that just shows great performance gains across the lab and also increasing their testing time, which the byproduct is better quality products.
All right, great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Lior. This looks like a question for Brian from OnPath. Are there any restrictions to the type of network or architecture that can be automated?
Good question. So from a first perspective, I covered a little bit about from OnPath platforms, we support everything from copper to fiber, speeds from low speed, less than a meg, to over 100 gigs. So it has no dependence on speed in terms of what you can automate. It also doesn't depend on the protocol. So network, whether it's an Ethernet or SONET or fiber channel type application, all of those different platforms can be automated in the same solution. And obviously the network type, whether it's a star or mesh topology, essentially it's the management of those connections and making sure that anything that needs to be tested and is correct information is accessible. So there really isn't any restriction. As it scales, it tends to be more of a challenge, but I think that particularly this partnership with Qualys Systems, Ixia, and OnPath has really addressed that and be able to do that in terms of both scalable platforms and scalable software.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So, Roger, maybe you could answer this one. What kind of in-house expertise would be required to deploy and maintain lab automation?
Sure. Very good question. Although these are all powerful tools, I found, to my experience, that they're quite easy to deploy and maintain, actually. Of course, you'll need some type of lab service team, which consists of a manager, lab engineer, and lab technician. You'll need to define the project deliverables. You'll need to manage the infrastructure. You'll need to review the LAN and WAN requirements. All in all, though, I think it's a basic customer support lab environment that can take and run and deploy this, as well as maintain it without any problems.
Maybe this is Leo from Qualys Systems. Maybe I can add one thing is that we have found, and we have also designed our system in such, and I believe that also the OnPath and Ixia solution, that we target an audience of that they need to be domain experts and not necessarily programmers. So this allows a wider audience to participate in testing and to be able to contribute to set up and to be independent. Kind of to augment on Roger's point, the fact that a lot of people can log in remotely and set up their own topology, allocate their own traffic generation port, and without needing to know how to code or how to create automation, and just do this with a very simple UI, kind of really increases the efficiency of everyone. So I would just add that domain expertise is basically what is needed, and not much more than that.
All right, thanks for the information, guys. So Jim Smith from Ixia, how big does my network test lab have to be before it makes sense to automate?
Okay, well, I would say, Jody, when I'm speaking with customers, I'm always talking about some qualification on where they're currently at and where their desired state is. And, our customers can easily do a self-assessment around how many scripts they have, how many team members are using their lab, do they compete for lab resourcing such as Ixia test gear, how many different vendors or equipment is in the lab. So I'd say if you're dealing with multiple teams or investing time to get access to the equipment, or you find that your staff is spending time, for example, recabling the lab, then I would say it's time to make that call. And we always have to think about it, our resources can't work 24/7, but if we have a good automated test environment and a lab environment, the environment will work very aggressively for us around the clock.
Great, thanks, Jim. Let's see. All right, how about Brian? What are the largest areas of time savings in automating my test infrastructure?
Okay, Roger, why don't you, if you can shift back one slide, maybe. I think this kind of summarizes a lot of what we talked about. So the time savings is obviously certainly in the labor it takes to move between configurations, for the planning, for the measurement of utilization. There's lots of time savings for the people that are actually doing the network orchestration. But that's not really where the biggest cost savings is. The biggest value, which we covered earlier in the business cases, was being able to take in that interoperability example, going from 12 hours to 2 or less in repeatable test environments, where you just get huge productivity, and that's better utilization and time savings on the equipment itself. So more people have access to what's there in place, and labs in general can get a lot more done.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. So here's another question that just came in. How can you keep the automation current with the changing elements or features? Sometimes all you seem to do is code scripts with the byproduct of less testing.
I'd be happy to answer that. This is Lior. We have seen a lot of automation projects that failed simply because the use of maybe a capture replay more than an approach that addresses the incremental value that you would like to see, and maybe to Roger's point on how to build an automation project. And the key here would be not necessarily just to constantly capture and replay scripts and then use them, and then maybe if something had changed, then you need to throw an entire automation project. But the approach of building blocks and the approach of libraries and then kind of object-oriented approach to how you develop a test project, which again not necessarily requires the knowledge of programming, but just the abstract approach towards all of the equipment that you have in the lab can really save you time. So the automation project is again around what you need to test, how to test it, and if something changes, if a device under test changes, if there is a newer version of an Ixia traffic generator, it's merely making sure that you have the right library to drive it, and it is detached from the test itself. We have seen that this approach saved a lot of time to our customers and allowed them to focus on the test itself. It allowed a lot of repeatability around that. So it really minimizes this issue. And again, if you enjoy a partnership like ours, then everything is out of the box. And whenever there is an upgraded version or new version by OnPath or Ixia, you get it supported by the software immediately.
Okay, great, Lior. Looks like, so here's a follow-on question to that. Drag and drop topologies were briefly mentioned. Could you expand on this approach and the tools involved?
Leo, you want to take that before we do?
Definitely. Maybe just to add one thing, and then you can take it. It's again, the intention and the idea is for an audience who is a domain expert to contribute and to create meaningful test scenarios, complex but not complicated to create. We are using and we are providing an interface that allows either to simply creating topologies and managing all your topologies by dragging and dropping equipment from your inventory. It could be something pre-identified. It could be abstract, like I would like to have a 10 gig port of Ixia, not necessarily from which chassis. And the same goes for the way we allow creating test automation scenarios and procedures around that, which is kind of a Visio-like, if you will, flowchart concept of creating your test environments out of those building blocks that were created, perhaps by maybe more sophisticated users. Again, it allows people who not necessarily know how to program to create whatever topology they need or test procedure they need.
Yeah, so Leo, I guess I'd like to add to that the drag and drop functionality is so taken for granted by us, but for those that have not done this before, I mean, essentially I covered earlier about the planning and the connection times. When you think about everything, like this picture on the right here on this slide, if you have the ability to simply connect any Ixia port to any of the devices virtually with a simple drag and drop connection and any number of connections, it takes away your planning time and your connection setup times, but also all of your logging. Everything is tracked. You know who made the connections, when they made them, whether they're being utilized, and so that's the power of all these software pieces coming together. It's not just the drag and drop, it's everything else that it enables.
Okay, Brian, here's a great follow-on to what we're talking about. How do we avoid lab resource contention if tests require different lab configuration?
So I think it's very related to everything we just discussed here. So maybe some of these questions may be overlapping, but lab resource contention is all about knowing what's being used. And if you don't know what's being used and when it's being used, it is very hard to fight for contention. But Lior can talk about, and Jim can talk about the scheduling functions that are available in the different software products that allow you to actually plan in advance, reserve equipment, reserve test pools, be able to make those connections, and if there's conflicts, you can even find alternatives that are out there. So that's the best way to prevent contention, but obviously there has to be at least something available at the time you want, or you have to be flexible in your time in order to be able to get that sharing to optimized. Jim and Lior, you want to add to that?
This is Lior. Yeah, I just would like to emphasize and highlight what you have mentioned around the ability to resolve conflicts and basically to see them ahead of time. A few ways to do that is either to see because everything is being managed. The system can also allow you the fastest track to resolve such a conflict, or by working over an abstract concept of devices that you need out of your system that not necessarily you pinpoint a specific IP or a specific port. If there are others available, then they kind of substitute whatever you need. So you can get more out of the existing equipment that you have and not necessarily bother yourself on how best to utilize it. The system does it for you and recommends the best path to resolution.
I'd agree with that.
Okay, great, guys. So, Roger, maybe you could answer this, and Lior could also comment. What would be involved with turning our lab into a lab as a service environment?
Very good question. Lab as a service to me means that you have to have the key structure in place. You will have to have LCMs, local customer managers, in place. You'll have to have service delivery management, as well as the boots on the ground, which are the lab technicians, the lab engineers. And then you set up policies and procedures and SLAs that you get your end users to agree upon so that you could meet your commitment dates.
Okay, Lior, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I can just maybe add to that. I agree totally with what Roger obviously mentioned. There is one thing that I can add, that by the fact that we introduced remote access to such a lab and remote control for the layer 1 switches and to create such complex topologies and the access to the Ixia ports, we allow, again, a wider audience around the globe to connect to such a lab and to get the most out of it. So kind of a follow-the-sun approach. And the lab becomes, or the lab assets together with such a system, makes it kind of a service available for everyone that you would like to introduce it to. Another key thing or important thing that you must have in order to allow that is to be able to reproduce environments and setups easily. So it allows you to set up the environment, to use it for whatever you need immediately. Then it becomes available for someone else. And when you need it back to test something again, you can just reproduce the same environment that you've left it and to bring it to the same state. Again, it's self-service kind of an approach, and it just calls for an administrator to set up whatever rules you would like to have around the lab. But it allows follow the sun, it allows higher utilization of everything that you have, and practically more testing done with the same environment.
And I'd have to agree, Lior. One of the key points he made there was some contention within engineering is that they can't have the equipment when they want it, and so they create these topologies, and then they think they'll lose it. But with this type of environment, you could create, store, and maintain, and then you could drag and drop your configuration, and you could bring it to an end node. So the next group, if they're in San Jose, if the next group is in Bangalore, they'll always come to a node that's in an end state, and then they could return it to that end state so that it is a follow-the-sun type of environment where the next engineer could just pick up and continue on with their testing.
All right, great. Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Lior. So, Jim, maybe you could take this one. Couldn't a customer simply buy products from your three companies separately and integrate them himself?
Okay, well, yeah, I'll address that, Jody. So absolutely, you can do that. And I'm confident the integration will go extremely smoothly because Quality Systems and OnPath and Ixia have worked with each other for a long time, and we're very committed to this partnership that we created. Although the main advantage of around acquiring the total solution together is leveraging the intellectual capital of the three companies and a very cohesive delivery plan that would ensure you get the support needed when you need it, and you leverage the expertise here. So if you leverage the whole solution and all the companies, it's going to help you set up your automation solution right from the beginning. So I think that's a big value. And this makes most sense to us because if you're setting up a lab as a remote resource and you need to ensure that your equipment is delivered and installed and working well, leverage all three of us in a cohesive solution is probably the right approach. But back to your question, you certainly can acquire separately, and we will support that.
Okay, so Jim, maybe you can address what's the key advantage then to providing the complete lab automation solution?
Okay, so yeah, I'll address that, Jody. So, if you think about it from, I guess, from a testing perspective, we recognize that network testing, lab management, it does require investment, right? And we understand that. So over the years, our own automation solutions within Ixia, we've evolved from, think about it, TCL scripts to very sophisticated software that can configure external devices, schedule tests around the clock. So customers are looking for a total automation solution that not only performs network testing, but can control the entire test lab and schedule resourcing. And that's why this partnership makes perfect sense to us and our customers. And the key advantage to the partnership is that our customers now can implement that complete test lab automation. So I know that was a little bit of plug there, but I hope I addressed that.
All right, great. Thank you, Jim. You did.
Yep.
Okay, so that concludes our Q&A session. It also concludes today's webinar, Test Automation for Tomorrow, IT Testing Complexity Simplified. We'd like to thank everyone for participating today and to offer you a free lab automation assessment. You can contact Roger Hein directly to learn how his company can help you coordinate and manage all aspects of your lab automation project. You can also contact Ixia, Quality Systems, and OnPath for any questions about their solutions. Each of you will receive a follow-up email containing a link to an on-demand version of today's webinar as well. Thank you all again for joining us today.